New Thinking Aloud is presented by the California Institute for Human Science, a fully accredited university offering distant learning graduate degrees that focus on mind, body, and spirit. The topics that we cover here. We are particularly excited to announce new degrees emphasizing parapsychology and the paranormal. Visit their website at cihs.edu.
Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hi, I'm Dr. Debra Lynne Katz, and I'm a guest host on New Thinking Aloud, produced by Dr. Jeffrey Mishlove. Many of you are familiar with the horrible story of John of God. He was one of the most famous healers of our century. He attracted millions of people to his healing center, and he would go on to meet with hundreds of thousands of other people at healing centers around the world. He was celebrated by Oprah Winfrey and Wayne Dyer and even the musician Paul Simon. People brought their friends and family members, and little did they know they were bringing them to be molested and raped. Children as young as 3 years old were raped in front of their own parents. This is a horrible story, but one that has to be told. And Michael Bailot, who has written a new book called The Cult of John, is the one to tell this story. He tells it in great detail, helping us to understand the societal and psychological factors that would create such a monster and allow him to operate for so long. We've got to get to the bottom of this because this is not an isolated case. There could be cases worse than this, although that's hard to imagine, but there are certainly cases on par of this. And even if there's just a case that is even a tiny fraction of what went on here, it has to be recognized, revealed, and stopped. And the only way we can do that is to discuss it. So that's what we're going to do here. And you might want to keep your children out of the room, but please stay with us and help us work through this, because many people's lives could still be at stake. Because even though John of God has been convicted on multiple counts that for anyone else would have him in prison for over 400 years, he remains free. How could that be? Michael will fill us in.
This story began more than 25 years ago. And during this part of my life, I was a student of shamanism and folk healing. And I visited many different types of people that worked in these modalities. One day I picked up a book about a person called Zé Arrigo, a Brazilian person who was known as the surgeon with the rusty knife. I read the book, and he'd already passed away many years before, and I felt really bad because this book spoke to me. I couldn't believe everything in there, but it spoke to me very loudly. So that began the process. And then within a short time, I came across another book, and it was about a different person in Rio de Janeiro who was also working with the same spirit that Zé Arrigo was working with, which is Dr. Oh my goodness, Dr. Fritz. Fritz. And so I wrote to him. My girlfriend was having health problems. They weren't being resolved by the hospital, and we were both students of folk healing. So this seemed like a logical approach. Let's see if somebody else can give us some advice. And so I contacted the fellow in Rio de Janeiro, and he said, "Sure, come on down." And then I had a friend who was on sabbatical in Salvador in Brazil, and she was studying Umbanda and Candomblé. and their healing modalities. And she invited us to spend some time with her. And during the same time, I came across a book about João de Deus, John of God. And all those things together prompted us to take this trip to Brazil. There isn't anything like this in the United States. People who are psychics or channelers don't usually do hands-on work, at least during this time. Maybe now it's changed quite a bit. But generally, psychics gave readings or channeled books, but they didn't get out a scalpel and start cutting people. So this was very strange for us to go see this.
And what year was
this? This was 1999.
What did you experience when you arrived?
First of all, I fell in love with Salvador and with Umbanda and Candomblé. It really captured me. I like everything African. I like African music, and this was a very hands-on experience. We went to various terreiros, various Candomblé and Umbanda casas where we watched people incorporate. And I have a tendency, my entire life, I'm very susceptible to going into a trance. And of course, we were very interested in learning more about healing. So my first impression with the Candomblé and Umbanda was a very good impression. The second place I visited was a healer in Minas Gerais, in Belo Horizonte, the capital. He also channeled Dr. Fritz. This experience is quite different because my girlfriend received a healing for loss of hearing, and she had 85% hearing loss. And this guy took a surgical device and crammed it into her ear and wiggled it around, and all of a sudden she started to hear. So my first impression was very, very impressed. I began to believe that this was for real. However, my girlfriend lost her hearing a few hours later, and it didn't come back. And I perceived that this happened because she just couldn't believe that it had happened. It was amazing. She kept saying over and over, I can't believe it. I can't believe it. I can't believe it. And eventually, this miracle disappeared. So then the next place we went was to João de Deus. I'm going to call him João de Deus, but you can call him John of God, whatever you like. It's the same thing. I was also very impressed there. Very impressed because there were hundreds of poor Brazilians coming by the busloads and in a very deep state of helplessness. They tried everything else, or they didn't have the money for the surgery they needed, and there was a lot of heartbreaking scenes there. And it was shocking what was going on. There was a television screen for everybody to look at before the medium showed up, and it looked like he was cutting people wide open and pulling out organs and all kinds of things. There was blood everywhere. So then when he has a little stage, and it's a stage act, actually. He has a couple of volunteers come up, and he demonstrates his great surgical skill with these people. And that was shocking too, because he actually did cut people open, and he really actually did put a hemostat in a person's nose and scrape their eye with a knife. So that was my first impression. Wow. I'm a believer in miracles now. Everybody at João's center, Casa de Dom Inácio, everyone there was saying, oh no, it's for real. He's healed millions of people, and some of them had terminal cancer. He even brought people back from the dead. So this is what we were being told, and it left a good impression, and I decided to come back a few months later, and I came back and stayed there for a few months.
What was going on that made you believe this was really happening and not just a stage show at the time? Because that's a question a lot of people would have. Like, how could you believe all of this to begin with? What were the factors?
There are a lot of people there, and including people that were closely connected to John, who claimed they'd been healed. So this reinforced the whole idea. However, like I said, I was a deep student of folk healing and shamanism and that whole approach. And I wanted to see for real. I wanted to know for real, I wanted to see, did he take a tumor out? Did you get x-rays? And this was the question I asked for the next 3 years, and I never could resolve that. I did not find one person that could actually give me empirical proof that he had healed them.
So countless people are giving testimony about this.
Countless, no. There were a lot of people that were there hoping they'd get a healing. He told them they were healed, but they still had the problem. I remember one of the first people I saw, he came in with a cane. He had a very bad back problem. João took the cane, threw it away, and said, "You're healed." He went back to his room, to his posada, and the next morning he needed that cane. So a lot of people were claiming they were healed, but I couldn't really substantiate it. I really wanted to. So I got so involved and so interested in this that I came back for 3 more visits, extended visits for 3 to 6 months, still hoping that I'd see that miracle. And still hearing many people saying, "Oh no, there was a miracle. It was just, I heard about it from somebody else, or it happened 3 years ago, or it happened to my mother," but I never got to meet these people and never got to confirm it.
Can you talk about the various roles that you had as part of the center? And also, why did you continue if you weren't seeing that evidence after the first year or two?
First of all, it's sort of like an indoctrination occurs. When you hear many, many people saying the same thing, and you don't realize that they're just repeating like a meme, it sinks in and you start believing it. So, okay, I didn't see a miracle, but quote, quote, thousands or millions of people did see a miracle, and everybody's confirming it. There's also a strange thing going on there. Nobody spoke Portuguese except the staff. So all these people visiting from many different countries didn't understand at all what was going on, were not exposed to mediums who did surgery, had no idea about this, the life of a psychic, the life of a medium, the umbanda, contemplate, all these things. They were completely innocent and completely in the dark. So who did they turn to? They turned to about a half a dozen people that were the official translators, and also either were tour guides or they owned one of the inns that people stayed at. What we didn't know was that these people were spies, and they were collecting data and giving it to John in advance. So when, for instance, if you went to one of these posada owners, you would have to go for your interview with John, with this person. And he would have your thing. He'd say, "I have breast cancer. I've had it for 6 months. I want to get rid of it. I don't want to get the surgery." And he'd translate this to João, but he also might translate a few other things. She's quite wealthy. She has very nice clothes. She's got some money. She's sympathetic to the entire idea. He might pass this on to John too. He might pass on even personal information, and then John will tell you that personal information, and you'll think, my God, the guy really is psychic because he knows that I have 3 children. I didn't tell him that. How did he know that? So my involvement was this thing of these translators picking certain people who were receptive and priming them, cultivating them to get involved and be a part of it. I didn't realize it was a cult. I didn't realize it was a cult until 20 years later, but it was a cult, and people were being groomed. There's no other way to say it. People are being groomed to enter into this, to bring more tourists and more money to the Casa. So very short, I think on my second visit, one of the posada owners said to me, why don't you consider bringing people here? Why don't you get involved? And because it was so much enthusiasm there, and it seemed like a very positive place, and because I was a student of these sort of things, I fell for the bait. And before I knew it, I was a house medium. Now, there weren't any rules for what it took to be a house medium. You just had to be invited to be one of these people. And this was a group of a couple dozen. Eventually it turned into maybe 100 people, but back then it was a couple dozen people that meditated every day for the entire length of both sessions each day. And we were told that our meditation was generating a kind of healing energy that he could use. So this made us feel kind of important too, like we were actually serving humanity along with this guy.
Now, I'd like to ask you a couple questions about that before we continue. I knew many people who had gone to visit with John of God, and they would come back and they would say, we never got to meet with him, but we had an extremely powerful experience sitting in the current with the mediums. Was that what you were part of? And how did that work? Because person after person swore that they were having very positive benefits from being with mediums like yourself.
Okay. So my background, when I was very young, like in my early 20s, I went to India and I had a guru there. And he was quite a disciplinarian. And I ended up, when I spent my 6 months in India, I meditated about 14 hours a day. So I developed a very strong discipline about meditation. And of course, thousands of people were there meditating, and this creates an incredible atmosphere. So sitting in the current is meditating. And I imagine that 95% of the people that went to the Casa had never meditated in their life. This was their first experience, and it was a good experience. I highly recommend meditation to the whole world. It'll probably resolve most of our problems. Also, there was this, it's like a community. There's camaraderie. Almost everybody there is either interested in healing or needs a healing, and they're all reinforced. Everybody reinforces it. And with the help of these posada owners and tour guides who tell stories that are really unsubstantiated, but it created a myth. So soon after I was assigned to my job as a medium, I came back again, and on that third trip, one of the translators, the posada owner where I stayed, took me through the line, took me to the medium. I had assumed the medium was in a trance and that I was speaking to one of his spirit guides. It took a long time to figure out that this wasn't what was happening. So I was beginning to understand Portuguese a little bit, and the guide said to Jean, "This is the fella I was telling you about. He'd make a great guide." He didn't know that I understood he said that to John. So then when I came up to John was all smiles, and he said, "Oh, yes, please help us out. You know, do a service, bring people here. We'd love to have you do this. Go ahead. And you can charge anything you want. I don't care. Just everybody else is charging money. Go ahead and charge money and bring people." This is what he was cultivating. And eventually he had at least 100 or 200 guides that had been given the same spiel.
How did you feel when he said that? Like, did you feel like you were special, like you were one of the chosen ones?
He already picked me to be a medium sitting there, and there were very few of those. He picked me to be a guide, and I was the second American guide that he'd ever picked. So it was like, wow, yeah. But not in the sense of egotistical. I'm a very inward kind of person. I don't announce anything about what I'm doing. I just wanted to help people. And the myth was that this was all free, that there was no money being exchanged, and that This poor man was a dumb, ignorant farmer who had no money at all, and he was doing this just because his spirits demanded it. To understand how I got caught into this, you have to understand the incredible myth that had been generated over some decades before I arrived. And the myth was that this was an infallible medium, and his spirit guides were able to see your aura, see your organs inside your body, see your energy body, see every past life you ever had, see your future, see what's good for you. This was a myth. This wasn't what was going on at all. He wasn't even in a trance when we had our interview with him. He would go into a trance for 10 minutes a session, maybe. The rest of the time, he pretended he was in a trance, and he just handed out slips of paper to buy herbs. And this is what was going on, a business to sell these herbs.
And did you know even back then that he would only be in that trance state for a very short time, and then he basically would turn into a salesperson? You meditated for years, so you can probably see and feel when someone is.
No, he's a very good actor, and he knows how to roll his eyes up into his head, for instance, and he knows how to affect. Now that I've studied mediums in Brazil a lot, there's a lot of fake mediums that affect that they've become possessed or incorporated in an entity, when in fact they're pretending. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't.
So at what point did things start to break down for you, as far as you started to realize not all is well in paradise?
It was about 2.5 years into this process, and I had already moved there. Actually, when I first moved there, then I began to suspect some things. For instance, I moved there. I also married a Brazilian woman, so we were a couple. We both worked there. And the minute we moved to the town and got a house, rented a house, one of the posada owners invited us over to have a little discussion in the evening. And this is what she had to say. She said, "There's rules here, and you're probably not aware of them, but it's my job to tell you how it works here. So first of all, don't ever go to another healer. Don't take anybody to another healer. Don't do anything at all here unless you ask João first. You have to have his permission." And for instance, I didn't have clients yet for the tours, but I was collecting them. So I asked about this. My wife was a massage therapist. She wondered if she could give massages there. And the posada owner said, "Really, you have to talk to John. You can just be here for a while, play your role, and then one day you can ask him, can I do massage? Can I do this?" And if he says yes, okay, you can. And then she said, "However, you're going to have to give him a percentage of your income." And I was dumbfounded. Here's the guy that's pretending that he's doing this absolutely for free, and according to her, you have to give him a 20% kickback on any money you earn while you're living there. But things were happening so fast. At that point, I had clients coming. My wife was allowed to do massage. We entered into it. There were always negative people around that were saying, "There's something wrong here, he's a fraud," but they were very much in the minority, and they were ostracized. Nobody wanted to hear this. Everybody wanted to believe in the miracle thing. So, but because I'm skeptical, I began to really see some kind of cruel things. There were people that were sick and dying, and he would tell one of the posada owners to chase them out of town. And then one of the people that I met, he molested sexually. And trying to get a straight answer out of either the posada owners or João was impossible. They just brushed us off like it had never happened.
tell us a little more about that. Like, how did you come to find out that this had happened?
There were maybe a half a dozen of these molestations that happened while I was there. And every one was swept under the carpet. The woman was chased out of town or discredited. And eventually this kind of started to pile up, and I began to get concerned. My wife and I began to get some concern. And right around this time, one of the tour guides from France went public with a letter to everyone, to every tour guide, to every posada owner. And he said, look, this is what I found out from people that are close to João. He's a rapist. He pays people to murder people. He's a very bad man. And he laid out a lot of the details. So I brought this to the attention to the guides and the posada owners, and they did not want to hear this. This was taboo. You can't bring this up.
Some people might say even one molestation was too much. So when the very first happened, why do you think like you and your wife didn't leave right then or go to the police? Can you help the audience understand the thinking behind that?
The first molestation was really kind of a pathetic thing. She was standing in line to have her audience with the medium. When she came up to the medium, he had a white towel on his lap, and he took her hand and put it under the towel, and what was there was his erect penis, and her hand came out with semen on it. Okay, he didn't rape her, he didn't attack her, but this is totally unacceptable. But I asked the medium, I had another guy ask João, and they said, no, this didn't happen. It did not happen. The woman left. There was nobody to substantiate anything. And I still couldn't speak Portuguese well enough to go to the police. I didn't even understand how you would approach this, because it would just be your word against his. And he was claiming nothing had happened.
Was there confusion between, is this the medium, John, or is this the spirit channeling through him?
Very much confusion. So some of the guides and some of the posada owners would say, it's the spirit, and the spirit knows what it's doing. The spirit is omniscient. It knows everything, and it knows every healing technique there is. So if he did that, it was a healing technique. Maybe this is how maybe that woman had molested as a child, and he altered her consciousness and she got confused, but this didn't happen really. He was healing her. And then eventually things reached such a crisis that we left. And I had about 40 clients that were scheduled to come. And I wrote to all of those people and I said, really, in good conscience, I can't do this. We're going to leave. We're not going to be involved in this. And I don't recommend that you come here, and no, I won't be your guide, and be careful. And that's when João found out that I had done that. And then he threatened to kill me. And later on, as I went deeper into this, I realized that he had threatened to kill many people, and that in Brazil, it's quite easy to pay somebody to kill somebody. So what he said to me was, you're a fucking idiot. Excuse me, I can't use that word on, but...
No, you can. Go ahead.
You're an idiot. You're an idiot. Don't you understand that for 300 reais, for $150, I can have somebody kill you? So we fled. We left. And I thought that was the end of my story, but I had close friends there that continued to work with him and continued to visit me. I moved not too far away. And over a period of 16 years, I heard many more stories like this. When somebody threatens to kill you, I would say most people would not, in a strange foreign country where already the police are corrupt, I don't think it would occur to too many people to go to the police to resolve this, particularly in a small town with 10,000 people. And I was very afraid of him. I regret that I didn't turn him in to the police, but many people turned him in to the police, unbeknownst to me, and the police did absolutely nothing for the next 16 years.
in reading your book, in every chapter, you go year by year and recount back how many people were raped year after year. It's like one year 16, another year 20, another year 10. And these are the ones you even know about.
Those people are the only people that reported it to the police. Most of his victims did not report it to the police. You want to know why?
Yes.
He threatened to kill him.
So can you explain how this behavior could go on for so long and he could get away with it? What were the factors that allowed for this?
Okay, threats of murder. This made very many people leave quickly and not say another word, particularly Brazilian people. Most of his victims were Brazilians, not foreigners. The people I was aware of were foreigners because they discussed it and brought it up to their guides at the posada owners. But the majority of the people were Brazilians, and the majority of them were too afraid to report it. They understood exactly what was going on. This was like a kind of spiritual mafia where you could really get hurt badly. And here he is, carte blanche. He's allowed to molest people. In my opinion, he molested people every single day that he had sessions there.
Did you ever witness him molesting people yourself?
No, but my wife did. One time, my wife did. She was given a role. She wasn't one of the mediums, but she was assigned to this room where they give invisible surgeries. This is another room where you sit in meditation. The medium comes in very briefly, says a prayer, and everybody in the room is healed. This is the myth. And in both the room where you have your audience with them and in this room, you're forbidden to open your eyes. You cannot open your eyes. You're very programmed to never open your eyes. So nobody saw what was going on. But in both of those rooms, he was actually molesting people, not attacking them sexually, but molesting them. So my wife saw him molest a woman, one of our guests that was staying with us.
Can you explain who some of the victims were in terms of their ages and in terms of why they were there, and also the different ways that he molested them?
When I began my book and I began the research, I had access to the police, the main people that were investigating them on the federal police force. I had access to their information. I also could communicate with them sometimes. So what they had to say was that when he was younger, it was serious rape. You know, the whole thing. And his preference was very young girls. Quite a few of them were under 6 years old. At least 3 dozen of them were under 3 years old. His own daughter began to molest her and rape her at 9 years old. As he grew older, the molestation took on other forms. Not quite so shockingly violent, but here's the thing. John is probably the best hypnotist I've ever met in my life. He knows how to do group hypnotism. He knows how to put a person in a trance very casually. You have no idea he just did it. And most of his victims were put into a trance and didn't even understand what was happening to him except in the middle of the event. So his preference was young women. I would say probably the majority were under 18 years old. But he wasn't particular. He did this with older women too. The oldest one was 65 years old. Most of them were too afraid to do anything about it. Even their parents were too afraid to do something about it. Most of them just left and it didn't come up again for many years for them.
Okay. So in your book, you give example after example of how women were molested in front of other people, that he would just tell them to close their eyes and then he would do whatever he wanted to.
It was one of his modus operandi. It was his technique. The closed eyes is a big thing about this. The room where he was in attendance, and thousands of people would come in front of him to get a slip of paper with the prescription for the herbs. Everybody's eyes were closed except the people in the line, and they weren't supposed to pay attention to what was going on. And you're in a line, so you can't see the person, the three people in front of you that he's attending. You can't really see what's going on. But mainly the serious cases, what he'd do is you could watch it. My friends and I watched it. At first, we didn't really understand that he was a rapist. We just thought that he was a womanizer. A young woman would come in the line in front of him, and he'd say, "My God, you're a medium. You're psychic." And she'd say, "Oh, me? No, I just me. I don't do anything like that." And he'd say, No, you're a medium." And he'd give her a piece of paper that said, "Come to my office afterwards, after the work." And he had certain people on the staff that would gather up these young women and bring them to his private office, and there he'd rape them. So there weren't any witnesses in those rooms except the victims. The more casual things he was actually doing right there in those rooms, unbeknownst to anybody. He was fondling people. He was having people touch him in places they should have never touched him. I never saw that, but that is what happened. That's what a lot of the people said.
And how many people working for him or with him were aware of what was going on? The people that would bring the women over to his office?
I hate to say this, but the majority of them knew it. And for whatever reason, they kept quiet. Either they were afraid or they were making too much money. The guides eventually made fortunes. Some of those people became millionaires just from the money they were getting by bringing people to Juan. They built hotels, they invested money into other things. It was a huge criminal enterprise, and a lot of people were sucked into it. A lot of people that the tourists admired and respected tremendously.
And
I'm not going to name people's names, although I do. Yeah, they're real people, and they really did this. They participated by looking the other way and rationalizing it. I heard many of it. I went to several of these people to complain and to try to get some help and understand how we could deal with it. And they generally would say two things. No, we're not going to discuss this because that would destroy everybody's faith. All these people have faith in the healing. What are you going to do? Destroy everybody's faith? Or they would say, it's a healing technique. It's not really molestation. He's healing people. Relax. But I couldn't relax. I never saw a cure in this involved in the house. I never saw a miracle cure. Somebody just walk away and everything's resolved. I saw a lot of people so sick from lack of treatment because of this one.
So let's talk about those two justifications. First, if you reveal this, it's going to stop all these people from getting healed. How do you respond to that? Is there any truth in that?
No. The people, no. Okay, I want to clarify something. I am sure people were healed there, although I never met one and I never saw this. I'm quite certain that people were healed. But John or some spirit that he works with, I really doubt that that's what healed the person. I think their faith healed the person. There were a lot of people that were very spiritual that went there. They were very evolved spiritually people. And their faith was very strong that spiritual forces existed and that you could receive a healing from this. But what John was working with was a certain type of Umbanda that's black magic. And people are healed by black magic in Brazil. This is the conundrum. This is a big conundrum. The people coming to John, I don't think a single one of those people were ever interested in black magic or even knew it existed. And certainly didn't expect that John was a magus, that he was a black magician. But he was. And all you have to do to hide this is to change things, okay? You say the Our Father and the Hail Mary every day. That makes you look like you're a Catholic or a spiritual person. You talk about auras, you talk about karma, you use the jargon of the New Age. People have confidence in these things. They're not going to throw that out the door, the baby out with the bathwater. They believe in those things. So when you're using those justifications, people got confused, very confused.
How do you know he was using black magic as opposed to simply faking all of this?
Okay, he was doing both. He was faking big time for sure. But the research I did with my book, I had a very difficult time writing this book because the first thing I noticed was 25 years of his history as an adult was missing, completely written off with 3 or 4 words. He was a healer. The police prosecuted him. He was always getting in trouble with the police. And he had to hide what he was doing by going to certain kinds of rituals where it didn't appear that he was doing anything wrong. And people mentioned the rituals. So I had some clues. So you see that in my book, I use a timeline, and I'm very strict with this timeline.
Yes.
And so I was able to trace every year of his life through other people's accounts or his own accounts of what he was doing in particular years, where he was, and what he was involved in. So during those missing 25 years, he was involved in black magic. In Brazil, it's called macumba, and it's also called quimbanda. It's a spiritual path, but it uses a certain kind of spirit that has no morals or ethics whatsoever. It's completely neutral. You can go to the spirit and you say, could you heal me or could you heal this person? The spirit says, sure. You can go to the same spirit and say, can you make me a millionaire? No problem. Go to the same spirit. I want to get rid of my wife. Can you take care of that? No problem. I got an enemy who's threatening me. Can you take him out? Can you make him disappear? Of course. So these were the kind of spirits that João worked with for his entire life. Historically, there was a period in Brazil where we had a military dictatorship for 21 years. And during those years, João got connected to this military dictatorship. So besides the fact that he was involved with black magic, which a lot of these military people were also involved in, he was also involved in a culture of torture that these military people were doing secretly. The public wasn't aware of this, but there were thousands of people being arrested and tortured and killed, disappeared. It very much like what happened in Chile and Argentina. This happened a matter of years before those same things happened in Chile and Argentina. There was a secret police force, a secret spy force, kind of like the KGB, and João was involved in all of this. Simultaneously, he was involved with these cults that did black magic. It's against the law to perform black magic in Brazil. It still is. It's against the law. But people do it. Thousands of people do it. Millions, probably. During this epoch when he was in the military, this was from 1964 to 1976, something like that, maybe later, 77, 78. The military was take all these different kinds of cults that worked with trances and possession and regulate them. And they were trying to shut some of them down and give other ones documents that allowed them to continue. And they were very corrupt. The situation with the military was incredibly corrupt. So if you had money or you knew somebody important, you could get a certificate that said, I don't do black magic, I'm a spiritist. I work with the principles of Allan Kardec. Or I'm one of the pro-religions here in Brazil. And so John availed himself of this, and his black magic metamorphosized into spirit doctor, which was very popular starting in the late 60s. There were dozens of people that were doing this type of surgeries with spirit doctors. So for him, it was a way for him to kind of step back from the fact that he just spent 9 years participating in the torture and murder of people and 25 years practicing black magic. Now he had these diplomas that said, no, he's a spiritist. He never was a spiritist. And this is how he began creating his casa. He created the casa pretending that he was a Catholic and a spiritist.
Apart from the casa, it sounded like he had other places where he would bring in local girls and hold them prisoner and just continuously rape them. Can you talk about that? And at what point did that come out?
Well, okay, I can talk about that, but it's not quite exactly the way you're presenting it.
Okay.
For when did he begin? For 40 years, he was an illegal gold miner. This is something that's very big in the Amazon, and that's where he lived during most of his time in the Amazon. So he was one of those people that you see in the news that is illegally destroying the environment, mining for gold, dumping mercury into the river, and enslaving people. So a lot of the people are men. They come there, they're offered a job, and then they find out that they have to buy their food there. And they find out that food costs 4 times what it cost in the village where they used to live. And then they find out that they're prohibited from leaving the mining camp. They can't go visit their wife or their mother in the town nearby because there's a man with a rifle that says they can't leave. Mm-hmm. These people have become slaves. This is a very big thing in Brazil in the mining camps and in a lot of the big ranches. There's many people that are secretly enslaved for years. They don't ever get paid. And they can't leave. And they're very violent people that capture them. So in these mining camps, I'm a very spiritual person. I meditate. I'm a healer. I like to help people. So I don't like talking about all this, really. I don't enjoy this at all. But the mining camps have prostitutes. Every one of them has prostitutes. They have their separate little places to live and do their thing. And they are also enslaved. They can't leave. And they get trapped in this. And some of them even have kids, and the kids turn into prostitutes. It's a very dark side of Brazil. So people alleged for years, and this came out when the big scandal came out about João, but it actually came out 25 years ago in the federal court in Brasilia, and they brought him on trial for doing exactly this, enslaving women in prostitution, and then when they gave birth, selling the children on the black market. Now, that trial, like almost every trial that he ever had prior to 2018, was thrown out for lack of evidence. It's almost like a cliche. He has hundreds of cases thrown out for lack of evidence. Some of them have 250 pages of evidence, but they were thrown out for lack of evidence. And no one ever proved that he enslaved women or sold them on the black market. But he was brought on trial for it. And then eventually there were women's groups who worked with rape victims, and many victims came forward and said, this happened to me. And he's selling children in Europe and in Australia. There's a trail there, but the police focused on arresting him for rape, and they didn't go further. And there's a lot of reasons why they didn't go further.
Well, what are the reasons they didn't go further?
Because there's politicians and military police involved at the highest levels, even at the Supreme Court level, and at the level of governors and mayors. They're all aware of this, but they were clients also.
Talk a little bit more
There's
about
no
that.
way.
Yeah,
I really can't talk too much about it. First of all, it might be seen as slanderous because I don't have any proof. This is based entirely on people's testimonies outside of court. The people that testified in the court against João, there were over 350 women that actually got to testify. Their testimony was sealed. We don't know what they said in court. We don't know the details. Every one of his trials that he was arrested on and convicted of are sealed. There's no access to it. The news reporters couldn't access it. So we only have information from a very small amount of victims that went on television or allowed themselves to be interviewed for books or for journals. And that's where this story really starts. There are plenty of people in Brazil who are selling children. There's no doubt about that. Nobody needs to prove that. That's already been proven. This is an industry in Brazil. And very often it's the children of prostitutes. And very often prostitutes can't escape the situation they're in, even if they want to. And very often they get pregnant because in Brazil, abortion is illegal and they don't use birth control. And there you go. These prostitutes all have children.
So you said some of the highest officials were his clients. When you worked at the Casa, would you see high-level officials coming in for healings or meeting with João?
Yes and no. No, lower level ones. The higher level ones, he went there. They didn't want to be publicly acknowledge what they were doing. And there's something else about politicians in Brazil. Not everybody's crooked. Not everybody's a criminal. But a lot of them are. And it's a lifelong project. 40 or 50 years, they get money and kickbacks and bribes from people, supplement their income. And this is the situation that João was in. A lot of these people wanted to come and visit him and have him do black magic for them. But here he has a healing center. You don't go to that healing center to get him to do a special ritual of black magic. You have a private session with him. He had a private airplane, so either he or they would fly to different places, and he worked with 3 presidents of Brazil. He worked with the mayor of the state I live with, the governor, the mayors of several cities around here, 3 Supreme Court justices in Brasilia. He worked with these people. They were his friends. He hung out with these people.
Wow.
I don't want people's names because it's dangerous. And it gets even weirder. There's a whole arm of the police, of the federal and the military police. Brazil has 3 police forces: civilian, military, and federal. The federal and the military police are very scary. They're way above the law. And within the military police, there have been multiple investigations and convictions of police running services for criminals. Okay? In other words, you could go to certain police officers in the town where João lived. They busted several dozen of these people. You could go to them and say, I want you to kill somebody. What's it going to cost? And you pay the money and you never had to think about it again. Then you see the guy in the newspaper. I died in a car wreck, or this guy died with a bullet in his head.
Wow. So it really wasn't that hard to find someone to go kill someone else. Like João told you, he could just pay someone like a few $100s and they'd go do it.
Again, most people don't want to read about this, but when I wrote my book, I had to be very careful what I was writing about. And Yes, and particularly in the states where he used to live, like Pará, Maranhão, Tocantins. In that region, this happens all the time, murder for hire. And usually it's something like some guy goes, some other person, the person who wants to kill somebody, he doesn't get his hands dirty at all. He has a friend who goes to a bar somewhere and asks around and finds some low-life person that'll do it for a very small price, gives him the information, and the deed is done.
Wow. Are you afraid for your own safety?
I am. But I'm not going to let that stop publishing my book and living my life. I'm not going to stop. I'm not so afraid of John, because I can really see that he's a broken man. He's been shamed publicly horribly for the last 20 years. He's not going to go out. But some of the people that work for him, oh yeah, they're quite capable of doing that. Yeah, I'm worried, yes.
And people may be shocked to learn that even though he has now been convicted of raping dozens of women across multiple convictions, he's not in jail. Can you tell us about that?
He was convicted in 18 trials. There were over 350 women that testified in detail against him. Each case he was given 60 years, 50 years. It accumulated to almost 500 years in prison. He was put in prison, and then COVID arrived. And the government said, wow, the prisons are like a hell for people with COVID. Everybody's going to get COVID in the prison. So let's take the criminals that don't have violent crime, they've never been convicted of murder or harming people physically. Okay? And if they're over 70 years old, let's let them out so they don't die of COVID and give bad press for Brazil. So he was let out on that principle over the COVID. And then his lawyers finagled things very much. He's never going to go back to prison. He's in house arrest. He lives in a 4-story mansion with a 3-story waterfall inside, a movie theater inside, a staff that attends to him. He's a multimillionaire. When they began investigating him, they discovered he had over $100 million in assets. He owned like several dozen pieces of real estate, huge condominiums, apartment complexes, clinics, hotels, ranches. They didn't take any of that away from him. They just arrested him and convicted him of sexual assault.
And then they let him out, and he's living like a king, better than most people. And he's even gotten married.
Of course, he likes the younger women. So when he was arrested, he had a wife that was 30 years younger than him. And she got implicated in this and had to get lawyers, and she got off the hook. But she was involved in this too. And then she divorced him. And immediately, while he was in prison, he married one of his lawyers, 30 years younger than him. So she lives with him in the mansion. And there's a lot of evidence that he's still running his Casa de Dom Inácio from that mansion. He's absolutely prohibited to do that, but there's a lot of evidence that he's actually still running the show, and there's real evidence, physical evidence, that he's taken money out of that casa that's generated there and put it into his personal bank accounts, and he's using the money that he generates from the casa this very day.
With all of these convictions, and you can imagine with all of the victims, with all of their attorneys, with all of these groups that are advocacy groups helping the victims, why is it that at the very least, the government didn't put him in a different type of house or facility. You know, there's an in-between prison and a mansion living with your new wife.
Well, this might explain it. About 2 years ago, he asked the court if he could invite some people over to have a barbecue at his mansion. One of those persons was a high official, like a mayor or a governor, and one was a ex-Supreme Court justice. So I think that answers your question, no?
Yes.
He has friends in very high places, and all of them have roots in the culture of torture of the military government. They have a secret that goes back 40 years or more, and they're in a little club, a little boys' club of criminals.
And, you know, if you were just saying this without the evidence, like, oh, there's these groups of government officials that are into black magic and torture, people probably wouldn't believe it, except for the fact that this guy does have now dozens and dozens of convictions, and yet here he is still living in his mansion.
It says a lot. And
why on earth would a woman who is an attorney and knows about all these other women being raped, why would she become his wife?
Indeed. Why? I don't know. Why? Very difficult to find any information about this person. We have her name. It's very easy to become a lawyer in Brazil, also, by the way. You only need to go to school for 2 years. It's a piece of cake. Anybody can become a lawyer here.
In your book, there were multiple cases of women who were molested and even violently raped, and yet they returned to John for healings, or they stayed there for quite a long time at the Casa. Can you help us understand this? Why would they do that?
In some of the cases, he threatened to kill their father or another relative if they didn't stay. In some cases, he threatened to remove the healing that he was doing for people close to them. In other cases, he threatened to kill a woman's child. He had a harem. The harem was composed of women that he'd raped, and it was composed of women that wanted to have sex with him. This is his private world. We don't know too much about it. In my book, I have 150 pages of documentation, and every single one of the things in the book is documented. Documented testimonies, documented trials, documented events. There's so many more that weren't documented, probably thousands more. Why did they stay? Part of this has to do with the Stockholm Syndrome. Do you remember the Stockholm Syndrome? Sometimes people were kidnapped and held hostage, like the people held hostage, the Israelis and the Palestinians held hostage. You're in a situation where at any minute somebody could kill you or rape you in that situation. And something happens to you psychologically. I don't know, because I've never had this experience, but they have a name for it. And you begin to just comply without question, like an automaton. They didn't decide to stay there because he was a rapist. They decided to stay there for several reasons. Maybe because he was giving them a lot of money, paying them off. Maybe because they were in love with him after he'd raped them several times. Maybe it was like the case of his daughter. She tried to turn him in many times, and each time he threatened her with death and her children with death. And
so he wasn't just all talk. He had the means to carry out people's murder, and there were examples of people that did die who opposed him.
The other part, he had armed men that worked with him and never left his side. These thugs would go talk to the women. The there was so much fear and threats of violence that I can imagine you could get trapped in there and not leave. And a lot of these were teenagers. They were very young women. They had no life experience. A lot of them, this was their first sexual experience.
You talk about in the book how you warned people, you warned young women to either not go, or if they went, to never be alone with him, and they didn't listen to your advice. Why is that?
Same thing. There's a myth, and the myth is very strong. So you go to the casa, and there's at that point, after I left, thousands of people a day were there. And they were all like, oh my God, he's like Jesus. He's the person that steps out and says, no, he's not Jesus. He just raped me. They were thrown out of town as fast as could happen.
So you mentioned he had these thugs who were very intimidating, but let's talk about people we might think of as opposite from that. The celebrities in the United States and elsewhere who promoted him. And maybe that was additional pressure on people to not question.
Absolutely. He was a famous New Age personality. He went to the Omega Institute 7 or 8 or 9 times. He was famous. He was internationally famous all over Europe, South America. He was a hero. Yeah? When you hear that, when you hear Ram Dass is saying this guy's a saint, when the CEO of the Omega Institute is accrediting him and inviting him back, sure, a lot of people doubted people like me. Not too many people wanted to hear my story over those 16 years.
You talked about how Paul Simon came to the casa. You talked about how Oprah talked about him. Did Oprah actually have him on her show?
She did 2 shows. One, she sent a film crew down without her, and they filmed it all. And one of her colleagues, who was the editor of her magazine, also came down and had a glowing report and wrote an article in the magazine. Those people could never have seen what he was doing. This was kept very secret. There were maybe 100 people at the casa that were part of the staff that knew, but nobody else knew. Nobody knew. And if they heard it, other people would say, well, those rumors go around because, look, he's a selfless saint who does this for free. They're just lying. They're just jealous. There were many reasons for people to ignore. Besides, you don't live there. You're going to spend 2 weeks there and go back to Australia or Paris or whatever. It went in one ear and out the other.
Even Wayne Dyer endorsed him, saying that he had healed him of his, I think it was his leukemia. Can you talk about that?
There were several cases like this. He didn't get healed of his leukemia from João. And just a few years after he was claiming he was healed, he died. People believe what they want to believe. And I'm sorry, but I imagine that even in this community where we're doing this production, there are people that are actually closed-minded and would never imagine that somebody might be doing something wrong or want to think about it or want to look into it. There's a grand level of denial in the New Age movement about bad people in their movement. And so you claim somebody's doing good and people are going to believe you. They're going to believe you. Those people were famous. They'd written books. They had an audience. They had YouTube channels. People believed them.
We recently had someone who was interviewed who was part of the Adidas community. That was a guru who was popular in the 1990s. And he was known to have sex with hundreds of his followers. And this one guest talked about the beauty and the glory of devoting yourself and giving all of yourself to the guru, as if this is part of the spiritual practice. And part of that practice is giving your body and joining in sexual union. And it's described as something beautiful. And so what do you say to that? Because where's the line of consent? And is it ever consent when there is such power disparities between, say, a teenage girl or a girl or a young woman, or maybe even an older woman who just has so much adoration for someone when they come and say, have sex with me because this will heal you, or it might be painful for you, what I'm about to do to you, but it's part of your karmic path. Where's the consent?
Yeah. This is the problem with cults. Okay? So João de Deus is a cult. And a cult is an oligarchy. You got somebody at the top, and then you have his underlings who do exactly what he says and wants, no matter what, without question. And you have an indoctrination of everybody involved in the cult. So they have their reality has been defined for them from the minute they bought into the cult. And this is what was happening with João. The myth convinced everybody that everything was okay, no matter what. And I'm sure it happens with the gurus, which is ironic. You know, most of the gurus are telling people to be celibate, and then quite a few of them are not following their own advice, and they're doing it with the people they told to be celibate. This is what happens when you get indoctrinated in something. You believe it 100%. And somebody's always there in that group to assure you, oh yeah, it's okay. A lot of the women that got molested or raped, most of them were technically raped. They were told by the staff at the Casa and by João that this was the healing technique. This is what would cure their cancer.
And a lot of them believed that.
This, of course. Yeah, this is what happens in a cult. You don't question the cult, you believe it. You're not in the cult if you're questioning it. It's like a requirement to be in the cult. You don't question it.
I think sometimes it's helpful to think of situations like this as a cult, and it sounds like it absolutely qualifies as that. I think your book that will be coming out soon, The Cult of João, is one of the first that really says this was a cult. But there are so many situations, such as in religions with Catholic priests violating, molesting, raping people, or maybe not even a religion, but just a group of people where one person becomes seen as almost godly, as more knowledgeable or more powerful than everyone else. And these dynamics are still there. So what do you think about that with, is it helpful to call something a cult, or does it blur the lines because this behavior could still be going on where it's not officially considered a cult? Like, I don't know if you're familiar with the Sarah Lawrence cult, which was just a guy who came to a father of a girl who was in college, and these students moved into a apartment living together, and the father started helping all the students and giving advice, and then he started to really be emotionally abusive, and then he moved them out of there to another place, and then pretty much they were like his prisoners, and he started to sex traffic them. So he never set out to say, oh, we're a group with these beliefs. And I think in the same way, João did not set out to say, like, we're a group with these beliefs and you should all worship me. It just all happened. It gelled together. What are your thoughts on that?
Yes and no. I'd say You don't have to be Charlie Manson to have a cult. If you really start analyzing it, there's probably millions of cults right now. They only become a cult when they've done something criminal or when they get caught doing something criminal. Before that, they're just a group or people or the Catholic Church or whatever. Cult is like a catchphrase, really. It wasn't used originally. That word wasn't used originally the same way I'm using it here. But again, I want to say, a cult is you have an authority figure who has an oligarchy. That's a cult. So you could have the cult of Donald Trump. You could have the cult of some housewife that isn't molesting or hurting anybody. A cult is somebody who's an authority figure and has people that are usually contributing to them financially.
How responsible should those people be held towards the behavior of the leader? Because they're really victims themselves in some ways. At what point are they? At what point is someone a victim, or are they the perpetrator if they're facilitating the behavior of the cult leader?
I think for many people, you cross the line when you get money or power out of the deal. Okay, so the authority figure sees to it that you get money or prestige or power, and then you're going to start ignoring the issues.
And what about if someone starts to notice something? Because in all these situations, there were warning signs all over the place. And so even like for yourself, the first time a woman said, "I've been molested," at that point, if everyone, the first time they noticed anything off, had said, "I'm out of here," or "We're going to discuss this out in the open," would this have been allowed to continue?
No, well, we did, and it wasn't allowed to continue.
And you did, but
every single one of them continued to work with 15 years, except me. There's ways to rationalize this. For instance, he never was arrested. There was no proof. And there were hundreds of people saying, that woman is just after money. She's a crazy woman. She's imagining this. The whole group, this is what a cult is. The group puts pressure on the people that are questioning the cult. That's a good sign. If you've got people questioning the cult and you're not ready to listen to that, you're probably in a cult. It might be harmful to you and other people. It's very difficult for me to do this interview and to write this book because I don't want to malign spiritual things or healers. But I do have a message here, and John gave us this message. It's like there could be secrets. There could be things that you are not privy to. And if you have an inkling that there are, you better be careful.
We reconcile that when we have people that we admire who are vouching for someone else. If we can't trust our spiritual leaders, then who can we trust?
There's issues here. Why do we need spiritual leaders? Why don't we have people just saying, you could be your own spiritual leader. You could have your own inner voice. You could have your own path. Why do you have to take a workshop? Why do you have to have a guru? What is going on with you emotionally, psychically? Why do you feel this need? Why do you think that there's actually people that are more spiritually advanced than you? What are the dynamics of this? It's a big question. I don't have all the answers. I just know that I've touched various cults in my life. I've come into cults and I've gotten out of them really fast because there's some kind of thing that doesn't feel right. So if a person gets involved in something and it started out innocently enough, you want to learn yoga, and now you're 10 years into it, and learning yoga is costing you $10,000 a month, and you've moved 3 times because your guru told you to do it, why aren't you asking some questions? Why aren't you taking a hard look? Am I a great yogi now? Have I really accomplished something? Or did I just throw away $200,000 in 20 years of my life?
I used to live in Sedona, and you mentioned Sedona in your book. And I would
No, I
notice,
hope
I
oh
would
my
notice,
God.
no, I would notice that if a guru came into town, if they were called a guru and they booked an event, they would pack the place. There would be hundreds of people. But if someone like myself who teaches intuitive development or how to empower yourself, I might have like 5 people come to class. Like, people were way more interested in going to an event with a guru than going to an event that said, learn how to empower yourself with your own intuitive gifts.
Personally, I had a guru when I was 22. He didn't take money. He didn't have sex with his students, and he was a good guy. There's plenty of those. But when at 22 years old, I wouldn't have known if he was a bad guy or not, really.
I like your idea of having training programs for people to learn how to not have this happen. But, when you talk about if someone's afraid for their lives for speaking up, and they have good reason to, because someone's threatening their life, then all the training in the world about how to recognize it, then it gets down to a personal choice. Like, do I want to put myself through the hell I may be about to go through by reporting or speaking out?
I don't know. This is a whole nother issue. How do you deal with the people that do bad? I'm just saying, just be careful they don't do bad to you, because I knew he was bad and doing very bad things for 16 years, and I couldn't speak out because I lived very near him. He knew exactly where I lived, my house. How could I do it when I knew that he'd paid to have people killed? I feel bad. I feel really bad. But every person I could talk to, I told them, whether they liked it or not, whether they wanted to hear it or not, I told them. And now many of those people, dozens of those people have come back and said, now I remember, Michael, I thought you were just bitter or negative.
One thing we haven't talked about is, beyond the fear of being physically harmed by him or the people working with him, is the metaphysical aspect. This is a guy that knows how to put people in trances. You tell stories. One story where he was mad at a guy and he just pointed at him.
He pointed at me. He'd given me permission to come up on the stage with a video camera and videotape very close. And I was looking through the viewfinder, a little screen, right in his eyes. And he turned to me, and he was not in a trance. It was so obvious. It was so obvious. And immediately he put his finger out in my face like that and said, "Get out of here. Go into the meditation room. Get out of here." And the minute that happened, some energy came out of his finger and went into me, and I was befuddled. I was stuck. I couldn't move. People had to actually help me walk to go into that room. He'd harmed me spiritually just with his fingertip.
You're sure it wasn't just the belief that he could do this? You felt some energy? It was
a surprise. I had no idea he could do that. This was way before I started to understand that he's a master hypnotist and a black magician. I just thought he was the famous healer.
You talk about another situation where he was in a room with some people, and another guy had come in to try to heal other people there, and he was mad that a healer was encroaching on his space. So he brought him into an office and said, "Look what I can do. Can you do this?" And then he pointed at a very mild-mannered guy who was an assistant there, and that guy went berserk. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah. John was a con man for real, but also he was a black magician for real. And he learned things that I'll never learn because I don't want to go there. And nobody on the spiritual path wants to go there. But he went there, and he knows how to spiritually manipulate and harm people. And when I denounced him and left the casa for 3 years, he tormented me in my dreams and was a presence that kept popping up when I didn't want it to be there and was trying to harm me. So yes, he could do that, and he did do that. And that's probably why a lot of the women couldn't escape, because he had them in a spiritual choke lock.
Now, you tell a story about how one of the final things that happened where you broke free of his dark magic grasp was you were in a shower and then you saw his image and the glass just shattered. Can you talk a little bit about that? And how did you know at that point that you were protected and freed from his spell?
I was being studied by some scientists along with a few other people with EEG readings. And after I had the EEG reading, back then, they didn't have these kind of helmets. They had to actually glue the diodes onto your head. So they had to pull them off. That was painful. And then there was this residue of glue and it smelled. So I went to take a shower, and the shower had a glass door. And when I went to enter the door, there was John. He had manifested inside that glass. It was there in 3-dimensional. And the minute I touched the door, it shattered all over me. There were thousands of these slivers of glass all covered my body. My spirit guide came to me and said, "We can't have this anymore. I'm not going to let this guy do this anymore." And he told me what to do. I'm not going to share it with him. I don't want Joanne to know what I did. But I didn't have any more problems.
Wow.
And when I wrote the book, again, he came back. When I started, this book took me 4 years to write. So for 4 years, I had to work really hard with my spirit guides to keep him away from me. And I probably will have to do it again. In fact, my life doesn't feel quite right now, too. And I imagine when I publish the book, it might get worse. He can't read. He's illiterate, so he's never going to read my book. But he has people that protect him and are still earning money, and they might read the book. I don't know how many people he actually let in on the secret. How many people actually are working with this black magic? But there are people in his circle that know. So the cults that John was involved in for those 20 years he was up there in the Amazon, they were black magic cults, and they did blood offerings. Some of them, the medium would cut himself and throw his own blood on the ground in order to incorporate and be possessed by his spirit. The spirit would not do it without the blood. Other peoples in those kind of paths do it with semen. And they whatever way they do it, they make an offering of semen. This is because in those cults, they believe that those two things are the most powerful holders of animal magnetism and power. Your life force is in the blood and in the semen. So if you make an offering of that, that's the best kind of offering you can make. Otherwise, alcohol, tobacco, or food is a good offering to call those spirits also. All of those cults make offerings.
Wow.
So here's something you got to think about. If you're involved with something where you have to make offerings, even if it's offerings of flowers, you really should consider what you're doing. What is that? Why do you have to pay for this spirit to come? What does he get out of it? What do you get out of it? What's this exchange? But in John's case, those cults he was involved in, they were using semen and blood for sure. When he opened his spiritual hospital, spiritists don't do this. Catholics don't do this. So Catholics sort of did do it with Jesus, but it's a whole nother story. But they don't do this. he had to keep doing it because he brought his spirits to the casa. So these black magic spirits he'd been working with up in the Amazon are the same spirits in his casa. He just gave them another name that worked with spiritism. And he couldn't stop doing the offerings. So that's why he made those cuts. This was a blood offering. I became aware of this as I was leaving. It became quite logical to me that that's what was going on. But when I did my research, now I see there's hundreds of cults in Brazil where they make offerings of blood. Semen is not so common, but it's very well known that's one type of offering in these cults. So he cleaned his image up. He becomes a spiritist. He believes in Allan Kardec. He's working with doctors. He's working with saints. He's working with Saint Ignatius. Imagine this. He wasn't working with any of those. Those were the types of spirits he was working with, and they had other names. They were these types of entities that demand a blood sacrifice in order to do any work. And then, yeah, maybe they heal somebody. Or maybe they mess with somebody's life. Maybe they make him very wealthy and protected from prosecution.
So what would you say to someone who hears about all this and they are already nervous about mediumship or possession or things like that, and then they say, I don't want to have anything to do with mediumship whatsoever? How can someone distinguish between black magic and channeling for healing purposes? You yourself are a long-time medium and healer.
I have had the great good fortune here in Brazil to have about 10 different mediums train me, all women, all good people that would never do anything bad at all and don't take money for any of this. So they were able to orientate me correctly. So I'd say to these people, these theoretical people that you're addressing, be very careful who you study with and understand that they're not going to be able to make you a medium. You either are one or you're not already. They're just going to show you the ropes and caution you on a lot of things. And there's a lot of things to be cautioned about. When I took my training with these women, they had mandatory rules. And one of them was almost total celibacy. One was vegetarianism for sure. Absolutely for sure. No alcohol. So if you're going to be promiscuous and drink a lot of alcohol and take drugs and think you can be a medium without consequences, I'm sorry to tell you, you're going to attract spirits that are attracted to those sort of things. And they're going to lie to you. They're going to tell you they're Jesus or the Apostle Paul or something. You have to, a medium has to keep a very clean vessel, a very clean mind to do this work. Otherwise, you're going to draw some bad stuff to yourself and hurt people. These 10 women, they all tell me, I have serious doubts about the whole thing. I doubt that I incorporated. I doubt that I have spirit guides. I think to have a healthy dose of doubt is a good thing if you want to be a medium. If you want to practice the art, you should doubt yourself. You should doubt your teachers. You should be very careful, because why would you want to have another entity, another consciousness enter your body and do things? Why would you want to do that if you had a choice? What's in it for you? Why are you doing this? I didn't have a choice. I went into spontaneous trances my entire life. I could write a book about it. So it's like, I'm just so glad I had good teachers that because they came after João and they actually healed me and protected me from João. They could see right away what it was. They warned me right away. You leave there, go away.
How can a person who is a medium, whether or not they choose to be, but how can they tell a good spirit from a bad spirit, or if a spirit is being truthful or not truthful?
You can't always tell, because spirit possession often involves you losing control and losing consciousness of what's happening. I'd say, first of all, if that's the kind of medium you are, you need to be hyper careful, because spirits can take over that are lying and want to manipulate you and want to really possess you for the rest of your life. I think you're a lot safer if your milieu of guides involves high spiritual beings, like in Spiritism with Allan Kardec. They work with spirits to channel them and get advice and stuff, but they always say, no, the angels and the divine beings are much, much more elevated than this, and they're the ones that really we need to obey and work with. You know, we may be a medium and we might channel our dead uncle and everything's okay, but if we don't call on a higher power to protect us and keep this going okay, then we could get in trouble.
When John of God would talk about the supposed spirits and spirit doctor that he was channeling, would he say that these spirits were of a higher realm like you're talking about, or would he say this was just a spirit that had any level of morals?
It gets complicated because of this thing that happens in Brazil. It happens in the Philippines too. It's called syncretism. It's when you take one religion and you start combining other things with it that weren't in the original teaching. And in Brazil, it was done to disguise and hide things. So when the African slaves came to Brazil, they did have all these blood cults and sacrifices and witchery. So that was normal for them. In their ethic and in their system, there isn't a devil and a Jesus. There's just spirits. They're neutral. Spirit could do anything. So John disguised the original spirits that he had, which came from these groups, and he gave them new names. So his main spirit guide is King Solomon. He's claimed that his entire life. All of his disciples said that. But the truth is in Macumba and in Quimbanda and these left-handed blood cults, they have a King Solomon too. And he's the head demon. He's the head devil that they all answer to. So this King Solomon of John wasn't the King Solomon in the Bible. He was the King Solomon of these black magic cults.
One of the things I personally experienced when I was spending time with the faith healers in the Philippines, and some of them I discovered were faking the bloody operation and involved in various kinds of illegal behaviors. But sometimes at these very same healers' churches, like right before the healing or sometime in relation with it, I and other healers who can sense energy very much experienced a healing vibration. And I had an experience even last night. I was about to watch a documentary about the lost children in South America there was a plane crash and the children survived and they were gone for about a month and a half. And right before the documentary came on, I started to feel healing energy and all this emotion. And I stopped the video and I said to my husband, "Are you feeling anything?" And he doesn't usually feel things. And he said, "No." But I said that because I was like, something is going to happen in this film that's going to demonstrate healing energy. And I had no idea, but as soon as maybe 10 minutes into it, it turned out like the whole story of the people tracking and the indigenous people were very much like engaging in different healing practices. And I was like, see, here's evidence that when I suddenly feel this healing energy, I'm not just making this up, because there's no reason for me to expect that in the film. And this would happen at different places. So my question to you is, did you have moments where you experienced healing energy and or actual healing effects, but at the same time, you knew that there were very dark things happening? Could you have both at the same time?
My experience is a little different, and I'd like to talk a bit about the Philippine psychic surgeons. It's something I cover in the book. I'm a student of shamanism, and I've been a student of shamanism for a long, long time. And I know a lot of Indians in Mexico and Venezuela and the United States who practice shamanism. And I've been to a lot of rituals where they use shamanism. The roots of the Filipino healers are in shamanism. Although they say it's Catholicism, again, it's a syncretic thing. It's very much deep, deep roots in shamanism. Okay. Shamanism, I've read a couple hundred books, anthropological books by professors. This interests me a lot when they do field research on shamans. I think almost every shaman has these tricks. Okay? It looks like he pulled something out of you. It looks like blood was there. It looks, John, he cut you. It looks like it was surgery, but actually it was a 1-inch cut. It wasn't surgery by any definition. These things are an important aspect of receiving a healing from a shaman, because it changes the equation. You're not in your mundane life anymore. You're something supernatural is happening, something that wouldn't normally happen. Even though it's a lie, you enter into this magical world where things can manifest and miraculous, weird things can happen that never could happen. It's part of the shamanic technique to make sure your patient gets that, because it puts the patient into a state where they're receptive to receive healing. So I know some of the Philippine healers were in it for the money, but a lot of them really were healers, really are healers, some of them still. They heal people. And they're not bad people, but they're doing tricks. And John certainly did his tricks too. They were tricks. I've seen this. I get in a lot of trouble with my Native American friends, but in a lot of their healing rituals, there's tricks going on. Nobody would say that, but it is true. It's part of the process of receiving the healing. A lot of people need the trick in order to go over the edge into the place where the shaman can manipulate astral energy to alter something and work on your energy body or break some karmic bond that you've had for 8 lifetimes. It's only when you can acknowledge that, yes, something could happen out of the ordinary. So I don't know if that answered your question, but I personally don't do tricks in my healing work. I just think it's unfair. But by the same token, for instance, if I'm working on somebody and I see something, okay, something happened to you when you're 8 years old and you haven't been the same since, that's some kind of magic, and I'll say it. But they don't understand that it's only because I can read their mind. I can see who they are. I didn't do anything miraculous. I just have a talent they don't have.
Why isn't that enough for everyone? You could see it's not a trick. You're using your natural intuitive perception to do something that most people don't think is possible. So why that's enough for you? So why isn't it enough for all these other healers?
Because they have no experience. All those people that, I'd say 99% of the people that went to João had never been to a healer before, didn't know a single thing about this. It was totally exotic to them. And they'd hear stories, and they had an expectation too. Miraculous things were going to happen. Strange things were going to happen. They set the stage for what they needed. They weren't going to pay all that money and come to Brazil if the guy just said a prayer and sprinkled some water on him. It wouldn't be enough. One time my wife's father said, my ex-wife's father said, she said, why don't you come up to João's? When we first started to work there, he could help you. He could probably cure your diabetes. And he just laughed and he said, if I wanted to ask God to heal my diabetes, I'd just sit in the chair right here in my house and ask him. But also people, well, here's another problem. There are a lot of books written about João, but every one of them was written by either a tour guide or somebody who had a vested interest in João. There was no critical books. So Americans, educated people around the world, they really trust in books. But in the New Age movement, I think we need to be very careful about books. And the book could be absolutely 100% true, or the book could be very false and very misconstrued and deliberately trying to mislead you. We can't believe everything we read. So all the people that came on those tours read those books, and they believed what the books said. So you've already crossed the line there. You're going to expect miracles. You're going to expect blood. You're going to expect the whole thing. And if you don't get it, why did you bother to come? There's plenty of places you could go in America with no blood, no miracles, but you could get a lot of help spiritually anyway. I can't fault the people that are doing tricks to try to help somebody. But if they're doing tricks to make money or gain sexual advantage of that person, well, then that's a whole other story.
Yeah, personally, I feel like if one person does a trick, if one person is found lying about their practice, then it does so much damage to the people who are really doing it, because then no one believes it, that it's whatever benefits could come from it, it's just not worth it. You spent a lot of time in a trance state and meditating at the Casa. And did you sometimes have an internal sense, like clairvoyantly, that something wasn't right? Like your mind was thinking everything's great, but did you get psychic perceptions showing there's a problem here? And can you describe those?
First of all, I had a curious consequence of sitting in that room working with the current. And that is, I remarked about it a lot, but it didn't register at the time, but I felt drained. After every session, I was exhausted. And I thought, okay, well, he says he's using us to do the healing, so maybe I've been doing my service. So that was my first warning. I don't think you should feel drained. I think you should feel uplifted and energized.
Exactly.
So that was a warning signal. And when I started to question what was going on there, and I sit in the current rooms, it was scarier than hell. It was frightening, because then I started to see what they called the backstage, what was really going on in the background. And that prompted me leaving really fast.
Were you getting images, things?
I'd go into visionary states. So I remember one time I saw John and one of the staff members in a vision doing black magic. I'd never had any vision like that before. I started to have this happen. That's when we ran, because he was lying to us. But how can you figure this out? You're meditating. I would never be inclined to go to meditation and think of some way to harm somebody or get rich or something. It wouldn't be why I would meditate. So I was getting what I would normally get when I'm meditating. That's what I was doing. I was meditating. But his secret world started to bleed in.
Is there anything else you would like to share or say to the audience before we wrap up?
I'd just like to say, I really hope you don't think of me as some kind of negative guy that likes to dig into dirty, ugly things, because I'm not that guy. I came on this program. I'm going to probably come on some other programs. I wrote the book because I want to caution people, because João de Deus, Casa de Dom Inácio is still open. And the people there that are running it are quite aware of everything that João did. And they're telling people that everything's okay, that he made a mistake, but that the spirits in that house are still healing people, and it's still worth paying the tour guide to go there and get healed. I just want to say, please don't go there. Please don't go there. Don't be that stupid.
This book was so informative. It is so detailed in laying out the history, not only of what happened at the Casa, but the years before. It gave such a great overview of these different religious groups, of the whole political and social situation in the country. And it read much more like a dissertation than just about any other book. And I so much appreciated the details and how you just went year by year, and you just did a really fantastic job on it. And I know it will be out soon for people. And I really encourage people to get it and to share it with other people. And I know you're not interested in how many books you sell, but just getting the message out. And I think this is a really important book. If anyone is going to read anything about John of God and this situation, I really hope they go to yours, because it really shows all the different players and who was involved and gives a lot of insight into this. And we can only pray that in his final years, maybe something will happen so that he can go back to prison, where he can't continue to reach people in the way that we know he very most likely is still reaching them.
I hope the book talks to other people besides people interested in John of God, because it's a message that's more general.
Well, thank you so much.
Oh, Debra, thank you too. Yeah.
You can now download a free PDF copy of issue number 8 of the New Thinking Aloud magazine, or order a beautiful printed copy. Go to newthinkingaloud.org.
Book 3 in the New Thinking Aloud dialogue series is UFOs and UAP, Are We Really Alone? Now available on Amazon.